Record? Okay, so yes, we are now recording. So for those in the chat here, we're now talking with Walter Block. And if I get any of this wrong, please just stop me. I assume you know yourself better than I do. So Walter Block is an Austrian economist affiliated with the Mises Institute, correct? All right, and he is, from at least my experience, what I've heard of him, particularly well known for his policy, which he terms evictionism, which is a moral justification for abortion. Is that correct, as far as I got?
Well, not exactly, no.
Oh, okay. Well, please correct me.
First of all, I am affiliated with the Mises Institute, but peripherally, I do give lectures for them and I blog with them, but I am a professor of economics at Loyola University, New Orleans. That's my full-time job. My work on evictionism is a compromise position between the pro-life and the pro-choice people. So it's not really a support of abortion. The people who favor abortion are the pro-choice people. The people who oppose abortion are the pro-life people. I'm neither pro-life nor pro-choice. I am an evictionist, for want of a better word. And shall I explain this a little bit?
Yeah, please do.
Okay. I claim that evictionism is a principled compromise between pro-life and pro-choice. What is principled compromise? Well, if you say 2 + 2 is 4, and I say 2 + 2 is 6, a compromise would be 2 + 2 is 5, but that's not a principled compromise because there's nothing from which 2 + 2 = 5 can be deduced such that it has any validity on its own except as a compromise. My claim is that evictionism is not only a compromise, but a principled compromise. Namely, it's something that can stand on its own 2 feet, and it's also a compromise. So let's consider the situation. The pro-life people say that you can evict and also kill. No, sorry, I got that backwards. The pro-choice people say you can evict the baby and also kill the baby. By evict, I mean just take the baby out of the womb or out of the mother's body, which leaves it open as to whether the baby will live or die. If the baby goes for 9 months and you evict the baby after 9 months, well, the baby can live. So hold on just 1 second. I can't talk now, I'm being interviewed. So there are really 2 choices. One is whether the person lives, and the other is whether they're evicted. So the pro-life person says that you can evict and you can kill. Whereas am I mixing this up again? No, I'm mixing it up again. I'm sorry. The pro-choice people say that you can evict and you can kill. The pro-life people say you cannot evict and you certainly cannot kill. That is, you can't evict before the 9 months are over. What the evictionist position is that you may evict the baby, but you may not kill the baby. Now, it's true that in the first 6 months, in the first 2 trimesters, if you evict the baby with modern technology, the baby will die. But in the 7th, 8th, and 9th months, in the 3rd trimester, you can evict the baby and it'll be premature, but it can live. And what I say as an evictionist is you may not kill that baby. Whereas the pro-choice people say you can kill the baby. So that would be the compromise position. And I think that this is a very important issue because 2 of the leading libertarian theoreticians, or 2 of the people who are leading the libertarian movement, disagree on this. Murray Rothbard is pro-choice, Ron Paul is pro-life, and I think both are wrong. And I say this with the utmost respect for both of them, but just because they're the leaders of our movement doesn't mean we have to agree with them. We're not a cult, we can disagree with each other and still remain friends and colleagues, as I am with both. I'm a big fan of both. So that, in a nutshell, is the evictionist position. I think it's the only correct libertarian position. And I want to make the case most difficult for myself, so I posit that the human life starts with the fertilized egg. As soon as there's a fertilized egg, there's a human being. It's a very young human being. It's not a very developed human being. But the idea, the only other alternative is to say, well, the person is not a real person until the person is born. But it seems to me that a baby 10 minutes before birth and 10 minutes after birth is the same baby, very, very unchanged in 20 minutes, as changed as you and I would be in 20 minutes, virtually not at all. Seems to me it's just a change of address. So I assume that the baby is a human being at the time of conception. When the sperm hits the egg, that's a human being. So can you evict a human being from the place where he needs to be? Well, it depends on who is the owner of the property rights. And I think the mother was there first. Libertarian homesteading theory says that he who homesteads the territory is the proper owner of it. And the mother, say she's 25 years old, has been homesteading her womb for 25 years, whereas the baby just got there 9 months ago, or 8 months ago, or 7 months ago, or 3 months ago. So clearly she's the owner of the premises. And the baby the human being who is in the womb against the wishes of the owner is a trespasser. Now, this is easy to see in the case of rape. Woman's walking down the street, and all of a sudden she gets grabbed, impregnated, and now there's a person growing inside of her. Well, it would be nice if she kept the person for 9 months and kept the person alive. The person is innocent. The father is not innocent. The father is a rapist, but the baby is innocent. But she doesn't have to keep the baby with her for 9 months. So she can evict it at any time, but she can't kill the baby. Unless it's to save her life in leaving. But ordinarily, you can evict the baby without killing the mother. So I think she has the right to evict it any time she wants. And even in the case of voluntary sexual intercourse, where in effect she invited the baby in, look, if I invite you to my house, it doesn't mean you have to stay for 9 months. So I think that the evictionist theory is correct, and the pro-life and the pro-choice are incorrect. And the benefit of this is that not only are libertarians divided on this issue, but so is the general public. And if we libertarians can offer a solution, a compromise, a principled compromise solution, I think this would help solve that problem and help promote libertarianism.
All right. So, before we go any further, a few users in the chat are saying that you're a little bit quiet. I don't know if you could increase the input on your end, or
Yes, I can increase it. I just increased it. Is that any better?
does that sound good for you guys in the chat?
Well, it's the best I can do.
Okay. Well, I mean, hey, we can go with that. Apart from that, we could just have you yell at us, which works for me.
Hopefully you can enhance the first few minutes of my talk.
Okay. So before we go further with this, would you mind if I ask you a few questions on evictionism? Because I know a fan of yours who's talked about it, and there's an issue I have with it. If you want to, entertain that.
Of course, please. That's what the whole point of an interview is to discuss and quarrel, and I don't mind criticism. I can learn from criticism, and maybe you can learn from my answers. Sure, of course. That's the whole point of an interview, is to have a back and forth.
Right. Normally with these, most of the questions are not, I'll read them out, but they're not actually from me, and I just kind of relay them. I try to keep my own views out of it so that, it doesn't get tainted, so to speak. I try to stay, I guess, unbiased. But so as I've heard of,
be biased. I'm kidding.
Oh, be biased.
Be biased.
So the part, the way, you put it, if you invite someone in your house, I talked about this with a fan of yours through an allegory, which I think highlights an issue with it. So the allegory is hey, if you invite someone into your house and then they say, hey, I don't want to leave, you're not obligated to keep them there. You can say you're not welcome anymore. I'm going to kick you out, right?
Yes.
I think the problem with that is that a better comparison would be if you brought someone in your house, basically through through no fault of their own, and you put them in a state of dependency. So it'd be like, imagine that, I mean, for whatever reason, I don't know, suppose that, you were driving home, and a snowstorm's coming, and you hit someone with your car, they're unconscious, and couldn't bring them to the hospital or whatever, but you brought them inside so that you could try to take care of them. And then there's a snowstorm outside, they're not conscious, they're in a state of dependency on you because of you. And then you say, well, I don't want you in here anymore, so can you just throw them out of your house?
Well, I think not. But the disanalogy is you hit this guy with your car. And if you hit him, you sort of owe him something. Whereas you didn't hit the baby. You didn't make the baby worse off. You made the traveler on the frozen street, you made him worse off. So you owe him to make him better off. Whereas with the baby, you didn't make the baby worse off. You created the baby. If anything, you made the baby better off. I'm assuming that babies now are disembodied spirits before the sperm hits the egg, and they're out there somewhere. And all of a sudden you call the baby into existence. So you're improving the baby's status. I think a better objection from your point of view, or from the critical point of view, and by the way, I've written an awful lot about this, so I've had a lot of these sort of criticisms, is, look, I invite you onto my boat, my yacht. I invite you for a little trip. And now we're 30, 40 miles out away from the shore. And I say, well, it's been nice having you here. You were here for an hour and I'm getting tired of your company. Please leave. And you can't swim 50 miles and you're going to die. Well, I say that this is also a disanalogy because there's an implicit contract between us. So what do I mean by an implicit contract? By an implicit contract, I mean, you go to the restaurant. Nowadays, you can't go to a restaurant because of the pandemic, but you go to a restaurant and you order a cup of coffee and you drink it, and then they present you with a bill for $1 million for the cup of coffee. Do you have to pay $1 million? No. I think that there's an implicit contract that if they want to charge an unusual price, and look, I'm not against price gouging. If they offer, they can offer a cup of coffee for $1 million and it won't bother me as a libertarian. But there is an implicit contract that if you drink the coffee down and they present you with a bill for $1 million, that's crazy. However, there is no implicit contract with the baby, because what you need for an implicit contract, what you need for any contract, is two people. And if you forget about the father and just look at the mother and the baby, at the time of sexual intercourse, there were not two people yet. It takes a little while after sexual intercourse for the baby to be created. The sperm has to go up some fallopian tube or other. I'm not sure which tube, some tube or other. And then it hits the egg, and it only reaches the egg after 10 minutes or a half hour or whatever. So at the time of sexual intercourse, you can't interpret that as an invitation. So I'm trying to help you out here by giving you a better example, a better refutation of my position, better than hitting somebody on a frozen street where you really hurt him and now you owe him. A much better case would be, I invite you to my yacht, and now we're 30 miles away and you can't swim 30 miles. I had an implicit contract with you when I invited you on that boat, that if I wanted to get rid of you, I would get rid of you in a situation that would be reasonable, namely put you back on shore or put you on another boat, or something like that. But to just drop you off in the middle of the lake or the middle of the ocean 30 miles away, I think is a violation of the implicit contract I have with you. So I would reject that criticism of my thesis.
Right. So I mean, the hitting with a car, like the main point here, maybe that's not a perfect analogy. The main point here is that the person is in now a state of dependency because of you, and I guess that your bit is they're better off. But I don't see how that makes it any different, in the late stages of pregnancy either. The person's better off, and if that can be waved away because you've improved their position, why is that so different in the third trimester?
Well, I think you can, the third trimester and the first trimester are the same as far as the law is concerned, as far as libertarian law is concerned, namely you can evict, but you can't kill. It's just medical technology that allows the baby to be alive if you evict in the third trimester, but not in the first two. By the way, right now it's viable in the third trimester, but as medical technology improves, and hopefully it will, then maybe soon in the second trimester you'll be able to evict without killing. And maybe in 300 years from now, if we don't blow ourselves up before then, the baby will be viable outside of the womb forever. I mean, it won't have to be in the mother's body. And in that case, if we adopt evictionism, then eventually the pro-life people will be satisfied. And I'm sort of pro-life. I like human beings. Some of my best friends are human beings. Whereas if we adopt the present pro-choice position, we'll never save all babies. See, if we adopt my position right now, we will save 1/3 of all babies, which I think is pretty good because, you know, right now in the US at least, you can you can abort. And abort means killing plus evicting. You can abort whenever you want. So right now, if we adopt my position, we have 1/3 of babies saved. And as medical technology improves, it'll be 4/9 and 5/9, and then 2/3 and 7/9 of babies saved. So that's pretty good. Now look, let's take a better analogy for you. Suppose I don't hit you, but I just see you lying there. Somebody else hit you. And it's a snowy day, and what I do is I grab you into my car, and I take you to my house, and I revive you, and I don't know, give you some chicken soup. I'm Jewish, so it has to be chicken soup. I give you some chicken soup, and now I say, okay, leave. And you say, well, if I leave now, I'll die because I'm still weak, and there's a blizzard out there. And I say, tough. It's my house. I helped you. I made you better off. I extended your life by an hour, say, and I'm not responsible for you because I didn't hit you. Somebody else hit you and left you lying on the side of the road. So look, if we libertarians believe in private property rights, we have to believe in private property rights. And just because you're going to die, look, I'm not a nice guy. I'm not saying I'm a nice guy when I kick you out. It would be nice if I kept you until, you know, I could bring you to a hospital or something like that. But if that's out of the picture, I'm not a criminal. I'm upholding the libertarian law, and it's my house, and you better get out if we're going to uphold libertarian law. Now, this sounds callous, and this sounds very non-utilitarian and non-pragmatic, but I would say that if we uphold private property rights strictly and radically and rapidly, more people will be saved, paradoxically, than if we don't. If we adopt my critics' view, namely that private property rights aren't sacrosanct, and that I have to keep you because in my house because you're helpless and you're going to die if I kick you out, more people will die. It's the same thing with that guy, Jean Valjean, stealing the loaf of bread to feed his kid. You know, it sounds really cruel to put him in jail because he was just stealing the loaf of bread to feed his kid. And, you know, our hearts go out to him. And our hearts go out to you, who is now helpless in my house. But if we want to save people, apart from upholding libertarian theory, which I want to do both, we have to uphold private property rights. And private property rights is that it's my house or the mother's body, and the mother should have the right to say who stays in her. Because if that baby stays inside of her for 1 second more, that baby is a trespasser. And I don't care if the baby is helped. Well, I care. But from the legal point of view, she should have the right to bodily integrity and private property rights. She has private property rights in her own body. We libertarians have to believe that. If we don't believe that, then we open the door to slavery. Because if she doesn't have full private property rights to her own body, I could rape her, right? I'm needy. Let's say I'm needy and I really need to rape her. I have a right to rape her, I think is a reductio ad absurdum. I do not have a right to rape her because she has total ownership of her body, and if I have voluntary sexual intercourse with her, that's okay. But if I rape her, I'm trespassing upon her, just like the baby is trespassing upon her. If you had to pick, probably my rape would be less of an invasion because I'm only going to invade her for, 5 or 10 minutes or a half hour, however long it takes me. And I won't impregnate her again because she's already pregnant. Whereas the baby's going to stay with her for 9 months. So I would say I have more of a right to rape her than the baby has a right to stay in her. Obviously, I have no right to rape anyone. And equally, the baby has no right to stay where the baby is not wanted in someone else's private property.
Oh, right. So jumping straight to our user questions is something I think hits in perfectly here. Robespierre asks, how do you respond to the departurist argument that the fetus is respecting the property rights of the female because it is completing the process of departure from the premises, and this should be allowed as the fetus is a non-criminal trespasser because they are morally innocent of the cause of the trespass?
Well, I agree. The trespasser is innocent. The baby is innocent. I mean, who could blame the baby? It's the father, the rapist. Well, the regular father, you're not going to blame him either because let's say the woman had voluntary sexual intercourse. Look, just because the baby is innocent doesn't mean that he can be a trespasser. There is such a thing as innocent trespassers. Look, what I do to you is I drug you. And then I stick you on someone's airplane or someone's boat. And now the airplane's 30,000 feet or the boat is 50 miles away from the shore. And the owner of the boat or the airplane sees you and says, what? Who is this? And, you wake up and you say, well, Block drugged me and stuck me here. And they're all telling the truth. There's no question about lying. That would come the issue. Well, do you have a right to stay in that plane or in that boat? No. You're an innocent trespasser, but you're a trespasser. You better get out of that boat if the guy doesn't want you in. Now, look, it would be nice if the guy said, you're an innocent guy. I'm going to land you and put you in a hospital or whatever, put you safely on the ground or on the shore. But just because you're innocent doesn't mean you can't be a trespasser, right?
Okay. So Jordan wants to know, just for everyone in the chat, I saw the stream disconnected briefly. It's back up again. You should be good to go. Jordan wants to know, do you see evictionism as pro-life, pro-choice, or neither?
Neither. It's a compromise position between the two of them. It's neither fish nor fowl. It's neither chess nor checkers. It's a new game. It's a new philosophy. It's the libertarian philosophy. And I think Ron Paul and Murray Rothbard are not being consistent with the libertarian philosophy. Libertarian philosophy is based on the non-aggression principle and private property rights based on homesteading. That's it. Well, the mother homesteaded her body first. She's the owner of her body. And the baby, the unwanted baby, is a trespasser, and she has a right to evict, not kill. Look, if you're on my boat and you're unwanted, I have no right to kill you. I can't shoot you, but I can say, leave my boat. Now, you're going to die anyway because you can't swim 50 miles, but I have no right to kill you. But I have a right to evict you. Look, maybe a friendly rowboat will come along. You can swim 1 mile and you start swimming 1 mile towards shore, and maybe someone else will pick you up. So I don't know. Maybe not, but I think I'm being more true to libertarian philosophy than the pro-life or the pro-choice people, and I reject both.
All right. So switching gears here, AAA JD wants to know, what do you think will be the effects of the recent stimulus bills?
The effect of the recent stimulus bills will be to create more inflation than we otherwise would have had. Will be to lower interest below the rate that they otherwise would have been, would be to stimulate long-term investments vis-a-vis short-term investments and consumption. Namely, I'm talking about the Austrian business cycle theory here, and lead us more likely into a recession than we otherwise would have been had this not occurred. So I think that's a big problem, and I don't think that the government should have done that. I think, well, I'm an anarchist, so I don't think the government should do anything. But if I were a minarchist, a minimal government libertarian, I would say that the government has an obligation to uphold, armies to keep foreign bad guys off of us, police to keep local bad guys off of us, and courts to determine who the good guys and the bad guys are. And certainly we shouldn't have a central bank or a Fed or any government. We should have separation of church and state, and separation of money in state, and separation of everything in state except for armies, courts, and police. So I think the limited government minarchist view would be the government should not have increased the money supply in that way.
All right. So for everyone in chat, if you guys want to ask a question, just write it in the Walter Block questions chat, and I'll read it out. So AAA JD also wants to know, what is your take on the privatization of public security services like the police and fire departments?
Oh, I'm in favor of it. And remember, I'm an anarchist, so I favor privatization of everything. My motto is, if it moves, privatize it. If it doesn't move, privatize it. And since everything either moves or doesn't move, privatize everything. Certainly we should privatize the fire department. Why should we have a government fire department? I mean, what's the reason for privatization? There are two reasons. One is pragmatic and the other is rights, deontology, or rights. Why shouldn't we have a government? Because the government necessarily violates the non-aggression principle. It taxes us. It tells us we have to pay for it and we have to join it whether we like it or not, just because we have homesteaded territory in an area that it claims for itself. It's stealing our land and robbing us. Taxation is theft. So that's one reason we should have privatization, because if we have the government do it, it does it with taxes, and taxes are theft. So we have a thievery going on. The second reason is pragmatic or utilitarian, namely, it'll be more efficient and more effective to have private enterprise do any one thing than to have the government. Why? Because if a private enterprise doesn't do too well, it loses money, and if it keeps losing money, it goes bankrupt, and other people take its place. Whereas the government, if the government doesn't do a good job, it doesn't lose money. Well, it loses money, but then it prints more money or taxes us more and supports it. Namely, a government enterprise can't go broke no matter how bad they do it, no matter how bad a job they do. The U.S. Post Office doesn't do a great job. They lose money every year. Is it still with us? Yeah, it's still with us. Whereas Spooner's, Lysander Spooner's Post Office, or the Pony Express, or the Wells Fargo, or the FedEx, if they don't do a good job, they lose money. And if they keep losing money, they go broke, and somebody else, other people take their places. So the Army Corps of Engineers killed 1,900 people in aftermath of Katrina. It was their levees that fell, and they're still in business. Where if the Mississippi River Corporation owned the Mississippi River, they would have done a better job. And if they didn't, they would have gone broke and somebody else would take over. So right now, what is it? The FDA is slowing down all sorts of attempts to cure the coronavirus. No matter how bad a job they do, they're still in business. Whereas we should have a private certification industry certifying food and drug, not the FDA. With regard to police, yes, right now there are more private policemen than there are government policemen. Every time you go into a shopping mall or into a big restaurant or a big grocery store, a Walmart or something, you'll see a guy there with a gun and a little uniform. He's a private policeman. There are more private policemen. Disney World, they got plenty of private police. Some of them are wearing duck uniforms or mice uniforms, but they're private police. So I don't see any reason why we shouldn't have private police instead of government police. And I certainly don't see any reason why fire protection shouldn't be privatized, maybe through insurance companies or independently or not. But I think the case is very clear. We should privatize post office, privatize fire department, privatize police, privatize courts, privatize everything.
So you said privatize courts. If you privatize courts, doesn't that mean that access to justice is now fee-based, like in the most fundamental sense?
Yeah, of course, fee-based. Yes, what's wrong with fee-based? I mean, yeah, look, if you privatize police, it'll be fee-based. If you privatize post office, it'll be fee-based. If you privatize the fire department, it'll be fee-based. Fee-based means part of the market. Whereas if it's not fee-based, it's going to be tax-based. Well, tax-based for a libertarian, it's sort of like, what is it? The cross for the zombie, or who are the people that if you show them a cross, they run away? I forget who, zombies or somebody like that. Fee-based is good. We want fee-based. We don't want tax-based. Fee-based means voluntary interaction. Look, right now you go to court and it'll take you 5 or 10 years for them to settle a case. Private courts do a lot better. A lot of times there'll be two corporations are having a contract, and they'll specify. I have an acquaintance who is a professor of electrical engineering at Stanford, and a lot of companies, when they make a contract, they'll name him. And I'll say, look, if ever we get into a dispute, we'll go to this guy and he'll settle it, because he is very knowledgeable about computers and electrical stuff, and he has a good reputation. And if he starts getting senile, what happens is they won't go to him anymore. Whereas if a judge gets senile, it's going to take a long time to get rid of him. I mean, we have, what's her name? The Supreme Court judge, the woman who's like 87 or 86. Ginsburg. I don't know if she's senile or not. I'm not claiming she is, but if she were, it would take an arm and a leg to get rid of her. Whereas, if, you know, I hate to be ageist about it. I'm 78, so I have to watch myself here. But who would go to a private judge who is 86 years old? Not too many people. Where she's on the Supreme Court. So, you know, the market always has advantages over the private enterprise. One, deontological, it's voluntary. And two, this competitive thing I was talking about with regard to post offices or sanitation companies, or, you know, you name it. The market is always more efficient than government. Well, not always. There could be an accident. I mean, there could be a good government activity, a good government bureaucrat, and a businessman who's just on the verge of going broke. So let me be more moderate about this. That's why they call me Walter Moderate Block. I'm a moderate anarchist. The tendency is for the markets to be more efficient than the government. Very strong tendency.
All right, but wouldn't this basically create something where access to justice is a privilege of the rich?
Well, how about access to mailing a letter is the privilege of the rich? Or how about access to bread is the privilege of the rich? Or how about access to a car is a privilege of the rich? Of course it's a privilege of the rich. Nothing wrong with it being a privilege of the rich. That's great. We want things to be privileges of the rich. Look, the whole point of an economy is to get rich. Rich is good. What is it that guy said? Greed is good. I forget the guy in that movie, Wall Street movie, Gecko. Gordon Gecko said that greed is good. Yes, we should have, the rich people should have better quality of everything. But if a court, suppose a court just always ruled in favor of the richer guy, the court wouldn't last too long. Nobody would go to a court like that if they were biased in favor of the rich. So the rich aren't going to get, you know, a home run or a victory or the verdict every time, because a private court would have an incentive to be selling justice, and the way you sell justice is not necessarily the rich guy always is right. But right now you have the same sort of a thing. Even with government courts, the rich have an advantage. The rich can hire better lawyers and stuff like that. So you're always going to have that. And you know, there's a joke. The Economist was asked, "How is your wife?" And the answer was, "Compared to what?" Well, yes. We have to compare the private court where you pay by fee with what we now have. And what we now have is very, very bad for the poor, relatively speaking. I think the poor would be better off in a free enterprise system. Look, the poor in a free enterprise country have what? Air conditioning, and they have a car, and they have color TV, and they have a computer, and whereas the middle class in countries that don't have free enterprise, they don't have any of these things. So it might seem superficially at the outset that the poor would be worse off because, you know, right now they'll give you a public defender or something like that. But I think the poor will be much better off with economic freedom than without economic freedom. And we're now talking about economic freedom, and economic freedom means no government if we want to be rigid about anarcho-capitalism.
All right, going to some other questions we've got here. The meme lord wants to know, what are your thoughts on the labor theory of value?
Well, I'm not a big fan of the labor theory of value. This is Marxist stuff. Labor theory of value says that things are valuable insofar as they have labor embodied in them. And, there's some truth in this, superficially true, because what is it? Labor is something like three-quarters of the GDP. So on average, the things that have more labor in them are more valuable. I mean, if you make a Philippe Patek wristwatch, which costs $30,000, it's got a lot of labor put in it, whereas you buy a watch for $12, it's got a lot less labor in it. And you buy a Rolls Royce or a Cadillac, it's got more labor in it than a Ford Focus or a Volkswagen, right? So there is some truth in that. Well, not truth, but there is some, what shall I say, some facts that would lead economic illiterate people toward thinking that the labor theory of value is correct. But there are so many counterexamples. It takes as much labor to make a mud pie as to make a cherry pie. And yet the cherry pie is worth 10 bucks and the mud pie is worth nothing. You can go out and find a diamond as big as your fist, and it's, worth $1 million. And there was no labor. You just saw it. You were just walking by the jungle or somewhere. You were walking and you found this diamond or this gold nugget, and it was worth a ton of money. And there was no labor in it. And then other people put a lot of labor in the Etzel or put a lot of labor in things that just don't sell, and they're not worth much. Another point is that the amount of labor in a car, or the amount of labor in a barrel of oil, or the amount of labor in a house stays the same because it's already built. And yet the price of the house or the car or the barrel of oil keeps changing. Well, if labor determined the value, and labor doesn't change after the thing is produced, the amount of labor it remains the same. And yet the price keeps changing. The value of it keeps changing when there's a shortage or not a shortage. Right now, the price of oil is very low, and the price of toilet paper is much higher. And yet the amount of labor in toilet paper and in a barrel of oil stays the same because the toilet paper is already made. So the labor is already embodied in it. So the labor theory of value is nonsense on a stick. And Bernie Sanders probably agrees with it, and he thinks that labor is it. I think that yes, labor is important. We need labor. Who can be against labor? But there are other things that create value. There's land that creates value. There's entrepreneurship. There's lending, being patient for lending money, and time preference, interest rates, entrepreneurship, profits, losses. All of these things are important, and they all create value, are all correlated with value. So we shouldn't think that only labor creates value, and that's the labor theory of value.
All right. And Wolfless24 wants to know, what is your opinion on counter-economics? Is it an efficient way to kill the state?
What kind of economics is that? I didn't hear. Concert?
Counter-economics.
Cancer? Counter.
Sorry, man. Counter-economics.
Counter. You talking about, what's his name? What's his name? SEK. That was his initials. I can't think of his name. Konkin. Steve Konkin?
Okay.
Is that what
I'm not familiar. I don't know counter-economics myself.
Well, I'm not sure what counter-economics is, but I can take a guess. If counter-economics is this idea that you
I'm hearing that, yeah, you've got it right. Konkin, yeah.
Konkin.
Okay.
His economic theory, I'm not a big fan of it. It's the idea that we should all get together and only trade with libertarians. But then again, I'm not really sure that I'm right in understanding what it is. I think it's just sort of, I'm not a big fan of counter-economics. I think what it means is that you get together with a whole bunch of libertarians and you just trade with each other. Well, that's all well and good, but we want to have a little bit more specialization and division of labor than just dealing with other libertarians. So I'm not really a big fan of that. I think, when I go to Walmart, I don't know the political views of those people, and they don't know the political views of me. And if we had to discuss it, they might not want to sell anything to me, and I wouldn't want that. no, I think we should have a worldwide specialization division of labor. We should trade with anyone. Well, don't get me started on trading with Hitler or anything like that, but trading with any non-criminals, and there are many non-criminals who are not libertarians. So I'm not a big fan of counter-economics, if I understand counter-economics correctly, and I'm not sure that I do.
What are your thoughts on libertarian socialism?
Libertarian socialism, that's an interesting thing. It depends upon what you mean by socialism. If what you mean by socialism is government owning the means of production and all the basic industries, well, then I'm against that. But if you mean by socialism the Marxist notion from each according to his ability to each according to his need, there's nothing wrong with that as long as it's done on a voluntary basis. The kibbutz, the commune, the average American family adheres to that principle. The little girl eats in accordance with her need, not in accordance with her ability to earn money. And the father also gets in accordance with his need, not in ability with his ability to earn income. So there's nothing wrong with a commune or a kibbutz or a monastery where they all share and share alike. I teach at a Jesuit school, Loyola University, and the Jesuits, they don't have a vow of group poverty, but they have a vow, not of poverty, but of equality. Namely, the lowest Jesuit can get a nice suit and not any worse than the chief Jesuit, is my understanding of how the Jesuits work. And certainly that's the way the kibbutz worked and the way the hippie commune works. So if it's voluntary, it's compatible with libertarianism, and if it's not voluntary, it's not. So yes, we're against, we libertarians oppose coercive socialism, but we welcome and favor voluntary socialism of this kind of thing where you share and share alike with a bunch of people, and if you agree to it.
All right. And on a similar vein, Saint Anand wants to know, what is the best argument against coercive communism?
Well, there are only two arguments against it. One is deontological or rights, and the other is pragmatism or utilitarianism. Let's take the latter first. Look at East Germany and West Germany, North Korea and South Korea. They're the same people, the same language, the same culture, the same IQ, the same everything. But due to an act of war, an accident of war, both countries are split into two. And one adopted communism, coercive communism, and the other adopted vaguely free enterprise. Not as free enterprise as I'd like, but a lot more free enterprise in West Germany and South Korea than in North Korea and East Germany. And what happened? You had almost a controlled experiment. We very rarely get we very rarely get so close to a controlled experiment as between East and West Germany and North and South Korea. Well, where was the voting with the feet? Where were people trying to escape to and from? Were people trying to get out of West Germany and into East Germany? No, they were trying to get out of East Germany into West Germany. Were they trying to get into South Korea or into North Korea? Trying to get out of North Korea and into South Korea. You look at night, from above, and South Korea and West Germany are lit up, and North Korea and East Germany are dark, no electricity there. So that would be the pragmatic or the utilitarian reason. Look at Cuba, look at Venezuela. These are horrible places. Now, Bernie Sanders will say, well, the socialism he favors is Scandinavian countries like Finland and Denmark and Sweden and Norway. But those are among the freest countries in the world, economically speaking. Yeah, they have a little bit of a welfare state, but in terms of tariffs and government regulation, they're in the top quartile of economic freedom of all countries. So that would be the pragmatic reason for opposing communism. The ontological reason is that it's coercive. It's people are ordered to do stuff. People are not treated as free agents. People are told what to do. It's not exactly slavery, but it comes a little close to slavery. So I think all libertarians would be bitterly opposed to coercive communism of the sort that I've mentioned, the Soviet Union or communist China. Although right now, under Mao, look at the death rate. Mao killed, 60 million people? Stalin killed 20 million people. Hitler killed 11 million people. Pol Pot only killed 3 million, or 2 million, but that was 2/3 of his country. By the way, Hitler was a socialist. He was a national socialist. He was a socialist. Well, maybe a fascist. I don't know. That's a whole other issue, the difference between socialism and fascism. But just look at the death rate of these experiments. They're mass murderers. And you don't get anything like that without these centralized communist places.
So I've got to ask the question here. How do you say that Hitler was a socialist when he privatized parts of the economy and worked with the capitalist class?
Yeah, no, I sort of corrected myself. He was more of a fascist than a socialist, but a pox on both parties. Hitler did have some private enterprise. He had regulation. There was the Krupp airplanes, there was the BMW, there was Volkswagen, there was Stuka airplane. He had private enterprise, but the difference between coercive socialism and coercive fascism is very superficial, very skin deep, very heavy regulation versus ownership. Obama was not really a socialist, except for taking over a little bit of Detroit. He was mainly a fascist because he believed in regulation. Bernie and AOC, and who's that guy from England that wants to have, the one who just lost, the commie in England?
Oh, I know what you're thinking. Corbyn, Jeremy Corbyn.
Corbyn. Those guys are real socialists. They want to have government take over the airlines and the railroads and, take over the factories. But what's the real big difference between taking over and owning a factory and heavily and fully regulating it? Not much of a difference. It's a sort of an economic difference. We have to distinguish between regulation and ownership. But from a libertarian point of view, we can say a pox on both your houses. They're both coercive, and we oppose both of them.
All right. Moad wants to know, he says, Austrian economists were saying that the financial stimulus in response to the 2008 financial crisis would create inflation. Did it? If it did not, why did it not?
You see, Austrians can't say whether it created inflation or not. We can always say, did it create more inflation than otherwise would have occurred? And we never know what otherwise would have occurred. So we can't definitively say, in other words, it's non-refutable. Austrianism is a, what's the word, a praxeological exercise. We can say things for absolute certainty. We can't predict anything because we don't know what otherwise would have been had the inflation not occurred. Now, the 2008 thing, the debacle or the recession or whatever you want to call it, all started, my understanding is with the Boston Fed. What did the Boston Fed do? The Boston Fed said, look, banks are being unfair to black people because black people are not getting as many mortgages as white people. And therefore, we have to have a change on the part of the banks. And banks is a very heavily regulated industry. So the banks pretty much did whatever the Fed told them to do. And what they told them to do is to give more loans to black people. This was all wrong because Oriental people had better loan record than white people. And nobody was saying, that the banks were against they were saying the banks were racist. The banks weren't racist. What the banks were moneyists. Namely, if you had good collateral, or I should say they were collateralists. If you had good collateral and you had a good, credit rating, namely you paid back previous debts, then you got a mortgage. And if you didn't, you didn't. Well, Orientals had, Asian people had a better collateral and better credit ratings than whites, and whites had better than blacks, and therefore the mortgages went yellow, white, black. It had nothing to do with racism. It was just collateral and credit rating. So what the banks made them do, rather what the Fed made the banks do, is start giving loans to people where they wouldn't have got it under a free enterprise system. And they didn't have the collateral and they didn't have the credit rating. And they started buying up houses. You didn't have to have much collateral. Previously, you had to have 10 or 30 or 40% collateral, part of the mortgage. And now you had to have 1% or something. So they bought much bigger houses than they could afford. and they were unable to keep them. And then we had the housing crisis, which started the 2008 crisis, because one, what are the dominoes, one led to another. So the whole thing started with the government, as do all business cycles, whether it's 2008 or 1929 or 1921 or 1817 or any of those things. It's always the government's fault. The government is responsible for all business cycles. The free enterprise system doesn't have it. Now, let's talk about what we have right now in 2020. This is not a business cycle. Murray Rothbard was very clear in his writings, as was Mises, that every once in a while, you have a frost, or you have a flood, or you have an earthquake or something like that, and the GDP goes shot to hell. But that's not a business cycle. A business cycle is something that has periodicity, and it goes up and down, and the up leads to the down, and the down leads to the up. What we now have is the coronavirus, which was like a super duper flood and an earthquake and a fire all put together in terms of the labor force ability to produce goods and services. I don't know what percentage of the labor force is now not working. A very, very high percentage isn't. Well, after this is over, hopefully one of these days, we're not going to have this pandemic anymore. And the seeds of a future depression will not be laid here. Whereas when the government messes around with the interest rate, then it creates the seeds of and creates a boom. The boom has the seeds of the future recession, and we don't have that now.
All right. Bob wants to know, how is your day?
My day is boring as hell. Except for you people, you're perking me up. No, I'm kidding about that. I'm isolated.
Oh, I know we're boring here. It's okay.
No. I was saying the opposite. I was saying I'm boring without you. You're unboring me. Actually, I'm not really bored. I just write a lot. I don't have to do. I do competitive race walking, and I don't do that. I go out to dinner with people. I don't do that. I sometimes go shopping. I get food delivered. So I'm sort of in my apartment, and I'm just writing like a ton. So I'm happy with that. On the other hand, I wish this thing were over. And also, I'm vulnerable. I'm in good health, but I'm 78 years old. So people over 60 are more vulnerable than other people. They're more susceptible to this virus. Yeah. So I'm sort of chickening out. I'm staying out of anything. I'm staying out of circulation. On the rare times I go out, I stay 10 feet away from anyone else. So it's not a happy sort of a situation, but what do they say? If all you have is lemons, make lemonade. Well, yeah. All I have is time, so I'm writing up a storm. I'm doing a lot of op-eds and a few journal articles, and I'm working on a few books. So I think I'm happily free of the virus. I don't have any cough or anything. I don't have any temperature, so I'm doing pretty well.
Yeah, I think a better phrase is if all you got is lemons, make lemonade, and then trade it with a guy who has vodka and wants lemonade.
That's a good continuation.
Let's see here. Joe wants to know, are you ever going to shave?
Well, by the way, I've allotted 1 hour for it. We only have like 7 minutes left, so we're coming toward the end of this.
Oh, okay.
I'm too lazy to shave, so I just sort of let it grow. But I understand that in order to have those masks work, you have to be clean shaven. And I am planning on getting on a plane one of these days, so I'm going to have to shave so I can wear the mask more effectively. So I will shave eventually. Otherwise, I'm going to be looking like a Hasidic rabbi soon.
Let's see here. This is some kind of communist Russian I can't say this user's name, but they want to know, how would an economy based on Austrian economics ever be capable of dealing with shocks to the system such as COVID-19?
You don't mean an Austrian. How would a libertarian be able to deal with COVID? I mean, Austrianism is just the theory of what causes what. Libertarianism, in contrast, is a theory of what should occur. And I'll change the question from what would an Austrian do to what would a libertarian do, or what would, instead of an Austrian society, what would a libertarian society, how would a libertarian society deal with the COVID-19? This is a tough one, because most libertarians take the view that we should follow the Swedish model, namely don't put anyone in house arrest, or don't quarantine anyone. And they're saying that the effects of their policy are just as good as Norway, and next door Norway, or maybe I've got these countries confused, but one of them is very strict like us, and the other is not at all strict, and they're having similar results. Well, if that's so, then the whole quarantine thing is silly. But I don't know if it's true or not. I think the facts are not yet in. Whereas most libertarians say we shouldn't have house arrest, we shouldn't have isolation, we shouldn't have any of that stuff, no quarantine. On the other hand, you know, we did have, what was her name? Typhoid Mary. And Typhoid Mary was working in some restaurant and giving everyone else typhoid. She was innocent. She didn't know that she had it, but she was quarantined. Was it just that she would be quarantined? Well, I think it would be, because if you're what is it? If people can catch the disease from you, and you go out there and you give other people typhoid, well, it's similar to knifing them or shooting them with a bullet. So I think typhoids could be justified. I think quarantines could be justified. Whether they're justified now, I don't know. I don't know the facts. And I think that both sides, that's why they call me Walter, or I call myself Walter Moderate Block, because again, I'm in between and in betwixt the two schools of thought. One school of thought is like Ron Paul, is saying that government is violating rights and it's not in the Constitution, and the government should stop it all. Other people are saying, well, you know, if it's a communicable disease and people can communicate it even if they're not symptomatic, they're asymptomatic, well, then quarantines are justified. My answer is, I don't know. It all depends on the facts. And for libertarian theory to work, you have to have accurate facts. And I think, you know, look, I personally am isolating. So my own personal view, my prudential judgment is that this is a very serious disease, and the quarantine might well be justified. Not the quarantine to save people, that's paternalism, but the quarantine to keep people away from others if they could communicate that disease. Can't talk now, I'm being interviewed. There is a compromise situation, and again, I'm not even sure of this. The compromise situation is, it seems that older people over 60, and also young people who are medically debilitated, like if they have a respiratory disease or cancer or obesity or things like that, they're in danger, and probably they should stay in on a voluntary basis, and everyone else should be let out. Because if young, healthy people are not let out into restaurants and into the street and into parks and into ball fields and into work, we're all going to starve. You know, eventually we're not going to have tractors. If we don't have tractor repair, and if we don't have oil for the tractors, you know, we're all going to starve. So I think the idea is to minimize deaths, and deaths can come not only from the coronavirus, but from, you know, people can't go to the hospital because they got a heart attack and they're afraid to go to the hospital, or the hospital won't let them in because it's reserved for coronavirus. So my own, I don't have strong views on this because we don't have the facts, and libertarianism without the facts is problematic. Look, I know that I shouldn't threaten to kill you, but I'm not sure what the threat, what constitutes a legitimate threat. It's a continuum area. It's sort of like, what should be the statutory rape age? We know if you go to bed with a 5-year-old girl, you're a statutory rapist, even if she agrees. We don't think she's capable of any agreement to any such thing. You go to bed with a 25-year-old woman and she agrees, well, you're not a statutory rapist because we think she's an adult and she's capable of making those decisions. But what should be the libertarian statutory rape age cutoff? Should it be 16? 16 and 1 month, 15 and 11 months? Libertarians have no answer to that. any more than anyone else. You sort of, I would just say whatever the private court says, we'll go with that. Somewhere around 16 or 17 or 15, I don't know. And it's the same thing with threats. Well, how much of a threat is the coronavirus? I don't know. And I think any libertarian who says that he does know for sure, as all too many libertarians are saying, I think is speaking beyond the facts. I think it's improper to be so sure about that without knowing what constitutes a threat.
All right, so I know you said you only carved out an hour for this, and we're at 59 minutes, so I guess we should just wrap up here. We've got a lot of questions left. If you're up to it, I hope we can have you on again in the future. We can hit some hard-hitting questions here, like Julio's, who will build the roads next time?
Okay, well, I did write a book about that, so I'd be delighted. These questions were great. They were inspirational, and I'd be happy to be on your show again. Take care, and send me the URL when it's finished.
All right, will do. Thank you.
Take care. Bye.